Hey everyone, and welcome to Tony for I'll Get What's Mine. Tony for you. Within the layers of hell exist a whole host of demons residing in each realm. Of the unknowable legion, there are a few that stand out above the rest and rule as demon princes. Representing the 7 deadly sins, these great princes are evil incarnate and embody everything immoral within the human spirit. The subject of today is Leviathan, the most enigmatic character in the Bible and the most imposing creature in all of the world. This entity is the demon prince of envy and the gatekeeper of the entire realm of hell. Perhaps the greatest motivator of action, seeing those who have what we ought to have, drives some people to the depths of depravity, justifying it all the way. Constantly comparing and weighing the worth of others to yourself can lead to absolute isolation and the absolute hatred of the world. From his origin in the Bible as the great sea serpent to the modern occult interpretation of the hellmouth, without any further ado, let's talk about Leviathan, gatekeeper of hell. This video was made possible by the great people over at my Patreon. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Also, I have a Discord, so if you want to come chat with me and other wannabe theologists, come join and hang out. To understand Leviathan, we must first understand his domain, envy. This sin is one that is very much tied to our early existence as a species. Witnessing the prosperity of another and wanting it for yourself is not always a bad thing. In truth, that is a benign form of jealousy. This feeling can drive and motivate us to be on the same level as another who has what we desire. A feeling that drives us to motivation and a feeling that drives us to anger are very different things, however, so jealousy and envy ought to be separated and clearly defined. You might be motivated to work harder by a friend who was recently recognized for his talents, be it in art, sports, or the workplace. You would feel happy for him and want what he has, but would never take it away from him. However, when you hear about a celebrity who bought their 3rd mansion in Europe, it might anger you to the point you wish you could tear it all down from the unfairness compared to your life, despite the fact you might do the same in their position. No matter how justified you might be in pointing out the unfairness of both qualities of life, the venomous hatred and hope for violence on another human being is not healthy. This can lead to dehumanization, from seeing someone as a person to simply an idol to be burned. Philosophers and theologians may help shed light on the difference between jealousy and envy more concretely. Aristotle, within his ancient Greek treatise titled Rhetoric, defines envy as the pain caused by the good fortune of others. Quite a short definition, but it can help differentiate the two. Jealousy, while still unpleasant, does not diminish your own life after feeling the emotion. Rather, it signifies wanting to share in the prosperity of another. Envy, on the other hand, signifies a palpable pain within the soul of the one experiencing it when faced with the good fortune of another, wanting to take it away from them and having it for themselves, or in some cases, just wanting to destroy what they have simply because you don't have it. Later in history, Immanuel Kant, one of the most predominant Enlightenment thinkers of the 18th century, wrote in his book Metaphysics of Morals a more lengthy definition of envy. He states it as a reluctance to see our own well-being overshadowed by another's, because the standard we use to see how well off we are is not the intrinsic worth of our own well-being, but how it compares with that of others. This definition is a lot more descriptive and understandable, despite the antiquated language. Essentially, he implies that the envious soul is that of one who does not truly understand the gifts of his own circumstances, and can only see them when compared to another. When the envious sees one who is less fortunate, he is happy and content. But when he sees one who overshadows him in that which he values, the fundamental way in which he views his worth is shaken and he is roused to anger. The truly just and righteous soul does not constantly compare their life and happiness to others, but simply compare to their own values and set of ethics. This definition is less so tied to the second party in the envious and the envied relationship, but rather the sinful mindset of the individual constantly comparing themselves to others. Jealousy could be the want to protect what one possesses from others, or the desire to acquire what another has, while envy is a deep resentment at the fact that another has what you ought to have, so much so that you believe your life is worth less for not having it. Transitioning over to the more theological definitions of envy, perhaps there is no better example of the sin than in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. Within the story of Cain and Abel, the two sons of Adam and Eve, they worshipped God unerringly for their entire lives. Abel was a shepherd and gave sacrifices of animals to God, while Cain was a farmer and gave sacrifices of grain and vegetables. Day in and day out, God gave more thanks to Abel's sacrifice than Cain's, which angered the young man greatly. God eventually confronted Cain directly, asking, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Cain didn't listen, however, and eventually ushered his brother Abel to follow him into the forest, where he killed his own brother. When God found out, he cursed Cain to forever wander the world as an outcast, forever cut off from the fruits of the earth. The envy he felt towards his brother was brought on long before the first sacrifice's worth was weighed by God. In truth, the reason why God looked favorably on Abel while turning away from Cain was because of the weight of sin on his heart. Cain was guilty of the philosophical definition of envy. He weighed his worth compared to another, despite the fact that both him and his brother were equal and loved. Cain resented his brother for much more than just the sacrifices. To impose your own standards for what is acceptable and good for another, least of all for God, is that sin that is crouching at your door, which will lead you to do terrible things, even murder. Cain failed that test and took the life of an innocent person, which damned him for eternity, never truly grasping the weight of his actions and cutting him off from the prosperity he would have felt had he just been content with his own wealth and love he received. St. Augustine, one of the most prolific theologians and philosophers of the extremely early years of Christianity, calls envy the diabolical sin. From envy are born hatred, detraction, calumny, joy caused by the misfortune of a neighbor, and displeasure caused by his prosperity. Perhaps the most obvious example of this is the reason we're all here in the first place, when war broke out in heaven. The angel Lucifer was once a high rank in the kingdom of heaven. Residing in the seventh layer of heaven, God's throne room, Lucifer was the embodiment of perfection. In mind and body, Lucifer had no equal and was created by God as such, but he had one flaw. His soul was tainted. Lucifer grew envious of God's position, and his pride drove him to plot and scheme to overthrow the Most High. Over time, he gathered the support of 1/3 of all angels in heaven and launched an assault on the Empyrean. Much to Lucifer's dismay, his assault was not enough, and he was beaten back, which forced him onto the front lines. God sent the archangel Michael to face Lucifer in battle, and by all accounts, Michael was at a disadvantage, but he still rose to the occasion. Lucifer's pride got the better of him, and he became desperate, not wanting to fight at full strength for fear of his perfect body being scarred, and not willing to fully engage for even the thought he might lose to an inferior being. Despite all this, it was still a fierce battle, and even transforming into a dragon was not enough. Lucifer was struck down, along with his army of once righteous angels, to become the demons we know today. Lucifer suffering from pride was his most prominent sin, but it was none other than envy that was the root of his corruption, and that which sowed the seeds of his complete and utter downfall. Now that we know what envy is, we ought to know what the opposite is: love. And it's better described nowhere else than in the letter Paul wrote to the Corinthians. While this letter is in the Bible, they can still be followed by anyone. In it, he states, "Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. So put the ways of childhood behind you. The fullness of life is not what others have that you do not. It's the love we all share, and the happiness that can be derived from it. Now onto the hellmouth, Leviathan, the eater of souls. The origin of the Leviathan can be derived from several books in the Hebrew Bible, including the Psalms, the Book of Job, and the Book of Isaiah, along with some non-canonical books like the Book of Enoch. While the idea of a giant sea serpent isn't unique to Christian theology in any way, the Leviathan has some interesting and unique aspects to it. Within Psalms and the Book of Isaiah, Leviathan is not quite the tremendous sea monster we know him to be, and was most likely just a word meaning a large sea-dwelling animal. Isaiah mentions the beast once, and says, "In that day the Lord, with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, that twisted serpent, and he will slay the reptile that is in the sea." The context of this passage is the restoration of Israel. With this, we can assume that the Leviathan is a representation of Israel's enemies rather than God coming down to kill a sea serpent for no reason. The book of Psalm mentions Leviathan twice, first saying, "You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea serpents in the water. You broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gave him as food to the people inhabiting the wilderness. You broke open the fountain and the flood. You dried up mighty rivers." In this verse, we can understand that the Leviathan is much more than just a mere sea serpent, but still a far cry from the horrible demonic beast we know him as today. So it still must not be the Leviathan. The second mention of the beast in Psalm and the Book of Job paint a picture of the Leviathan that is much more terrifying. This great and wide sea, in which are innumerable teeming things, living things both small and great. There the ships sail about. There is that Leviathan, which you have made to play there. These all wait for you, that you may give them their food in due season. The context of this passage is praising God and his ability to provide for all he has created, even the mightiest of sea serpents who dwell in the deepest parts of the abyss. The juxtaposition between the small fishing boats paired with the Leviathan, whose mass is so great it would consume those boats without so much as a thought, is terrifying. But the passage states that even with our great differences, we all rely on God and were creations of him. And now, all these mentions add up to the final and most interesting description of the sea beast in the Bible within the Book of Job. Here, a man named Job has his faith in the Lord tested by a Satan. Over the course of the book, the poor man's life is torn apart, and it causes him to have a complete breakdown, upon which God speaks directly to him. Job asks God why he would treat his loyal servant in such a horrible way, to allow such evils to befall him. God responds by asking Job who it was who gave each animal their unique circumstances. Who gave the horse such immense strength and will for battle? The hawk the ability to soar so swiftly and have unparalleled vision? Each one was created by God, but all these animals have been tamed by man and understood. So God shows Job a beast no man has ever truly seen before. The Leviathan is laid bare before him. God describes the beast in tremendous detail, stating, "Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another, they stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him." Here, God uses the example of the horribly terrifying Leviathan as a means to convey his supremacy over the world and that he has created innumerable things. God does not see in the same manner as humans do. He does not feel as humans do. He does not think as humans do. While the world is horrible and evil to some, to most, the world simply is, and to assume you know better than the one who created it is asinine. His thought process is beyond any one person's imagination. From this original description of the beast Leviathan, we can come to understand his more modern occult interpretations. It's uncertain if Leviathan was ever a denizen of heaven or simply a primordial beast whose vastness and might dwarfed any other being of the earth. The creature's size was described as even being larger than the earth itself, which led many to believe it was not so much a physical being, but rather a godlike entity or spiritual creature, much like an angel. Being one of the first creatures to inhabit the corporeal space, he was insatiable and aimed only to devour, which threatened the natural balance of the world. God and his angels struck at the beast, cutting off portions of his body, which coincided with the events of the war in heaven. As Lucifer and the fallen angels fell alongside the beast, the Leviathan thought only of consuming more and more. Being a spiritual being, however, the creature consumed all things outside of the physical world. Lucifer and his newly created demon kind found a home inside the Leviathan's vast body, which was dubbed as Hell, whose fires roared hotter than anything thought possible on earth, bubbling up from the belly of the beast. Now there exists two gates in the afterlife, the gate to heaven and everlasting peace, and the mouth of the Leviathan, to hell and everlasting torment. The great beast Leviathan seethes with the envy of his past power and the need to consume all things, to grow ever larger in a bid to encompass the entire universe in his great size. Leviathan's depictions in artwork rarely portray him in his entirety, as he is much more than any one canvas can do justice. With a head much like a great demonic lion, he is shown devouring the souls of sinners to be sent to the depths of his fiery belly, whose size makes up the entire underworld. A truly terrifying beast, and one of the most interesting beings in all of Christian canon. Well, that covers the Leviathan, hellmouth and prince of envy. Let me know what you think of the beast in the comments down below, and while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. This is my personal favorite Prince of Hell and demon in general, so I hope I did the great beast justice. Special thanks to Andre Vinicius da Silva Valens, Anton, Kalos, Goose Kebab, Jeter Michelle, Just a Middleman, Matt M, Patty123, Stuart Ash, The Digital Dutchman, The Toaster Messiah, Video Gamer 75, and many more for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this biblical demon breakdown, and I'll see you in the next Tony for You. Have a good one.